Hello everyone. It's 5 minutes past 4, and I think we are going to start our webinar today. So, webinar today being hosted by Crisp Excel Training and Consulting. We are corporate and individual trainers in advanced Excel, HR analytics, project management, and also consultants on data management and analytics. Our presenter for today is Islam. Islam is a certified data analyst at KPI Institute of and an accredited facilitator in data analysis and visualization. Some areas of expertise, if you need any assistance in one of these areas, you can reach out to him. Is data storytelling, data visualization, data reporting, and he's also a certified journalist. So you can follow him on LinkedIn. I'll send you the link on the charts for him to follow him. So the topic for today is database functions and how they relate with other functions like SUMIF and the rest. So without wasting too much time, Islam, are you there?
Yes, Crispo, how are you doing? Hello,
Yeah,
everyone.
good. Yeah.
Thank you for being here. Thank you, Crispo, for giving me this opportunity.
I think we can start as we wait for other people to join in.
Okay, great. I'll try to share my screen so we can get started. Okay. So as Crispo said, and of course, as you know, as you registered for this webinar will be about the database functions in Excel. And database functions are basically a group of functions that have been there for as long as Excel existed. So since the first start of Excel database, functions have been there, but they have been not regularly and commonly used. And the database functions, which are also called the D functions, have become old and forgotten. So we will get to why database functions have become old and forgotten through the webinar, and we'll get to see how they actually function and how they compare with similar functions, as Crispo said. But first, also, as you give me thumbs up for the sound check and the video check, please give me some thumbs up or raise a hand or give me anything in the chat if you are familiar with the database functions. Let's familiar with the database functions.
I don't think they are that popular, but even I rarely use them. So
Okay.
I think Collins is writing. So let's see. Maybe you tell us why, how come they became forgotten.
Okay, so let's first, that's what I'm gonna get at eventually by the end of this webinar. And just I wanna just point out some things first. Like database functions, when we're gonna see database functions and how they operate. And through this webinar, I'm not gonna be just covering the database functions. I'm gonna be also covering somehow XF function or the aggregate F functions. That's like SUMIF and average F. And I'm also gonna be covering XFs functions like aggregate Fs, like SUMIFs and average Fs, and these family of functions. And why? Because the three groups of functions are all functions basically to do aggregations based on a specific criteria, right? Except for this guy who are based who can work with only one criteria. Again, like SUMIF and average F. So as you see, like the XF functions and XFs functions, and I'm gonna list all the members of the families of the three families in the next slide. But as you can see for now that the XF functions and XF functions are cool people. They are still young. They're still well used. Despite that, they were also introduced with the first launch of Excel as well. So they are also old, but they are not like our grandpa, the database functions, because they are still used. They are still so popular and still so common. So they are living still their young age and prime age. So nobody old here except old in the sense of being grumpy and forgotten and living by himself, except for the database functions. So let's see each group of functions, the members of this group, the different variations of the XF functions, XF functions, and the database functions. So as we said, that they are all functions to do aggregations based on specific criteria. Okay, so they are all about aggregations with filtering, right? Basically. So the XF functions are like SUMF, average F, count F, and I think we are familiar with those. We have the XFs function, like when you have more than one criterion that you want to aggregate the values based on, you will use the XFs function because it gives you the ability to add more than one criterion, several criteria. So we have some Fs, average Fs, count Fs, and starting from Excel version 2019, you can also do min Fs and max Fs. They were introduced in version 2019 Excel. So 3 functions in this family are related to this guy, and 5 functions related to this another cool guy. And our grandpa actually has 12 functions with some aggregations that are not available in both families. Most importantly, the database functions have been having the minimum and maximum since forever. They are new to the XFs functions, but database functions can do aggregations like minimum and maximum since Excel has been existing. It can also do the product, like multiplying the values, do aggregations with multiplying the values. It can get you the standard deviation, either with considering that the standard deviation is taken from a sample or a population. That's a slight variation here that's out of topic, but anyway, it can get you the standard deviation with either of these two functions, and it can get you also the variance, which is basically the standard deviation power 2 to the power of 2. And it has this family, or this grandpa has some unique side of him, let's say like what he does when he is alone, his alone time. This function, the final function, is also a variation of the database functions, but it operates or works in a little bit different way than all of the database functions. And the database functions overall, they operate and work in a little bit different way than all the other functions, maybe in Excel, and of course different than the XF and XFs. So as we go on with this presentation and we go on with practicing and seeing how these things actually work, we will basically be comparing between these functions and how to work with these functions and the differences between them, the advantages and disadvantages. Will be discovering all of that as we proceed with the presentation. And we are gonna see how the grandpa became old and forgotten. Mainly, I'd say from now, and you'll see this like yourselves later on, mainly because as I said, it needs some setup or some preparation that is not familiar with the other functions that we are not used to when we are using the other functions. So basically, what we are gonna cover this presentation, this webinar, how to use the XF functions. I'm gonna do it like practically. So if you have never used the SUMF or average F or COUNTF functions, don't worry, because we are gonna be doing this together today. And but at the same time, I'll not be getting into so much details, so many details about the XF functions, because this is not like the core of the webinar. But anyway, we'll be covering them. So if you're new to these functions, don't worry. We'll also be covering the XFs functions like SUMIFs and averagefs, and then we'll get to the database functions. And this, I think, is where we are going to spend some time, and it makes sense, I think, because this is the core topic of the webinar. And eventually, we'll get to sum up and conclude with the conclusion of our comparison that we have seen with practical application, but also we're going to have or draw a use cases decision tree. Like if you want to do aggregation for values based on specific criteria, which way do you choose? Which way do you go with? Like, do you go with the XF functions? Do you go with the XF's functions? Or do you go with the database functions? And we will see based on what you can get to which group of functions. And I hope I'll be showing that despite that the database functions are actually not commonly used and they are old and forgotten and stuff like that, there are many use cases for them that they can operate and they can solve your problems and can be the best solution for the problem that you have. I hope I will be able to show that by the end of the webinar. But I'm also gonna be mentioning like the advantages as well as the disadvantages, and I'm gonna be plain and clear uh, about the disadvantages of the database functions, our own the grandpa. So everyone has pros and cons, and that's just c'est la vie. So we are gonna get to the XF functions, and let's now hop to jump to our Excel and the actual stuff. A demo dataset, maybe you have seen such datasets before. It's just 50 rows. It's a dataset for employees in whatever company with every record representing an employee with age, salaries, department, and the employee's job title and the hiring date. It's just a nice and mock data set. Okay, and we are gonna deal with this data set through the XF function, the XFs and the functions, and we're having a separate tab for the get function, which is again a member of the D functions, but because it behaves in a little bit different way, we are gonna have a separate tab for it. So let's go first for the SUMIF for the XF functions or aggregate F functions that include SUMIF, averagef, and COUNTF. So maybe as you're already familiar and you already can do that, maybe that if we want, for example, to sum all the salaries of all employees in the sales department, for example. So we have one criterion, and for that we are going to go with the SUMIF. So in order to use the SUMIF function, we have the SUMIF. So the range that we want to filter according to is the column of the department. So in order to access the column of the department, we can simply choose the whole column, or as you can see, the whole column name has been written with the table name. I prefer to write the table name from the start. So that's the table and column department. And the criteria here that I want all the employees that are in the sales department. So I want to average or sum up every salary that has sales in the department. Okay, so I'm gonna write in the criteria either sales as hard coded in the function, or I'm gonna like reference the cell directly. The same thing. So And now the sum range, what I'm really wanna to sum up, I want to sum the salaries. So here again, I access the table and salary, that's what I'm summing up. And let's see if that works. So yeah, we have the sum of salaries for every employees working in the sales department as $8,127. And basically, this is the syntax or how to write the XF functions. All right, so we're gonna see that average F, the variation of the XF functions are also the same syntax or the same way of writing. So table XF department, we want to filter according to department. We want to include only employees that work in the sales department. And the range to average here again is the salaries because we are getting average of the salaries. So table XF salary and that's set. So the average is 1,600-ish. Now also in the XF functions family, we have the well-known and popular celebrity COUNTIF function. The COUNTIF function, it's it because it's counting based on one criteria, so you give it basically one range and the criteria directly. So basically what it's gonna do that you're gonna give it the department column and say basically count the rows that have all the rows with sales in the column in the department column. So basically count each word sales in the column. So the range that you are given it is the department, so table XF, department, and criteria sales. And we basically have 5 people in the sales department. Okay, so that's the XF functions. Simple and clear. We are dealing with one criteria to aggregate values according to this criterion. So when the XF functions get upgraded in the game, like get some upgrades and some gears and gears up a little bit, it becomes like XFs because XFs can accept more than one criterion. You have a set of criteria. So again, with the same database and everything, now we have to do these aggregations based on two criteria. For now, let's say the department sales and the age is older than 40 years old, as we have a column for the age here. So basically, just to see how XFs can be done. So first, we have to give it's a syntax that is similar to the XF functions, but maybe with a little bit different order. So first, we have to give it the sum range, what we want to sum up. So what we want to sum up is the salaries. So I'm gonna access the column salaries, salary, and I have two criteria. So I must give it two criteria ranges and two criteria as well. So my first criteria range, the range that Excel is gonna look into and filter the values according to take the values that match that filter and aggregate and sum. The first range is the department, right? And criteria is sales. The second criteria range is the age. So again, accepts age and I'm gonna select the cell that has greater than 40. Let's see if that works. It does. So now what we are doing is that we are summing up all the salaries of people in the Department of Sales with age higher than 40 years old. Also, we can play a little bit with this. I don't know, maybe let's let it be like above 20 years old, smaller than 25. We don't have anything matching in this. 35 or whatever. We're just playing with the things to see that it is, since this cell is dynamically or referenced inside the function, we can, if we change anything here, the aggregation changes because the filter changes. Basically, in the average Fs, we have the same syntax as well. Again, the average range is the salaries. Criteria range, departments. Pardon me. Department, and the criteria range 2 is age. And we can keep on like adding criteria. And the point that I want to get to here is that these, as you stuff criteria into the XFs functions, you are telling Excel to aggregate only the values that apply these criteria, like the department sales and age is greater than 40. Maybe we can add like, and hiring date is after 2021. So we are basically adding and criteria, like adding that all of these criteria have all to be true in order to get their values inside the aggregation. And that's an important point that I wanted to make before moving to the functions, because there will be a little bit of a difference there. So basically, that's the average Fs function, and I don't want to repeat myself. So this time, I'm gonna just copy and paste the function and change the. Let's just do it with the countfs because it has a little bit of peculiarities. So the countfs, as we said, as we saw with the countf, you give it directly the range that you want to count within. So that's gonna be the department. And criteria 1, sales. Maybe if you have like to count, and we are gonna do that if we close the function just like that. Basically, it's gonna count like the countf, because in both it has one function. But let's see if department is also, we want to include either sales or to include sales, to count sales and engineering, for example. Engineering. So I'm gonna add another criterion in here, referencing engineering. Am I? Yeah. So yeah. So what is wrong here that you have to enter the range, the second criteria range. So again, table XF department and I6. So that's the thing about the countfs, is that if you enter like to count like records that have both sales and engineering, or engineering in the department, because here you actually want to do like an or logical operator inside the xfs function, and that's why the xfs function cannot work. The point that I want to get to here, that xfs function cannot work with the OR operator, and that's what I'm gonna showing that in order to get over this, we use the database functions. So let's erase this for a moment and go on with the minifs. And before we do that, I'll fix the references with F4, so we have a $sign before the column and the row number. And I fix also this reference and enter, so I can copy this function now. And instead of average f's, we also have min f's. And again, this is available starting from Excel 2019. So if you have a version prior to that, probably will not get to see the minifs function. So the minimum salary that satisfies, let's get rid of that, satisfies these two criteria are the minimum salary is $841. Similarly, the max salary is gonna be max ifs, and the same syntax, the same exact syntax. And the max salary is 1,971. So before we get to the functions, is everything clear and fine on your side?
Yeah, everything is clear. There are no questions. If you have any question, you can put it on the chat.
Yeah, please do.
Yeah. Otherwise, you reserve the questions until the end of the presentation.
Yeah, I'm gonna be aiming to have a plenty of time for questions, maybe discussions around the old Rambo database functions and everything. So we'll have time for questions and discussions at the end if you wish.
Okay.
So that's the xfs functions. Let's get to our core topic today, which is the database functions, or as they used to call it, the D functions. It's a nickname for the old grandpa in his prime days. So basically, I'm gonna say it clear and plain and simple here, that's why the old grandpa is a little bit unused and not common. That's basically because of this part here, that before you get to start to write the functions itself, the function itself, you have to set what is called a criteria table. And this has to be an explicit table that have the column names exactly as they are in the database or the table. And if you like made like a slight mistake, like if you add like a slight and if you add a space at the end by mistake, that would mess things up. So you have to construct a criteria table that has the same column names as they are in the original table, and we are gonna be giving these functions both the original table that we want to filter and aggregate and stuff like that, and also the criteria table or the criteria range that has the same column names and that has all the criteria that we want the function to filter according to. Okay, so the starting fact that it has to have a criteria table, that makes it a little bit different. I think you'd agree, a little bit different than the other functions in Excel that we usually use. So let's do let's do first all these aggregations with the database functions and to see also how these functions work. First, please allow me to change this to sales to just a little bit of an experiment to see what's gonna happen. But yeah, basically we want to do these aggregations according to these criteria. So now, before we start building the functions, how to read this criteria table in the first place? And this is the first thing that, or one of the things that are unique also about the database functions, that you can give it more than one set of criteria. So in the XF functions, you give it one criterion. The XF's functions, you give it one set of criteria, like multiple criterion, but they all have to be true in order for the function to include the value and aggregate it. In the database functions, you can give it more than one set of criteria, meaning that you have the first set of criteria here represented in this row, and the second set of criteria here represented in the second row. So for example, when we are doing a database function, a dsum function, for example, when we are summing the salaries according to this criteria table, we are telling Excel to go and see all employees that are in the department of sales and that have or that are older than 40 years old and younger than 50 years old, with hiring date later than the 1st of January 2020 and no later than the 1st of January 2022. So as we read the criteria table in the row, it's basically like an and, right? So this set of criteria has to be all true in order to add this value to the aggregations, or also add to the aggregation the second set of criteria. Employees who are in the department of product management, who are younger than 60 years old and joined the company on the 1st of January 2018 or later. So that's set one of criteria, and that's set two. And that's the first thing that, or again, one of the things that are unique with the database functions is that can easily work with one set of criteria. And just I'm gonna mention here, I'm gonna say it later. You can still do that with the XF's functions, but with workarounds. Some workarounds are maybe a little bit complex, some are simple. But my point is, why would you go for workaround as long as you can do it with a direct function? And a lot of the tutorials that I see on the internet, when they deal with a problem like that, like using an OR operator with the XF's functions, they go for the workarounds and they skip over the old and forgotten old grandpa, the database functions. So without any further ado, the database functions, how they are written. So the first, the sum, how to do the total salaries. So first thing first, all the database functions require three inputs. First, the database itself or the table. And I'm gonna write the first function, this function, with a little bit of different ways of generating errors in order to see how database functions can be easily messed up, but eventually to build up and write the right syntax of the function. So the database, the table, so we can select or highlight the whole table. I'm gonna just write the name of the table. Yes, that's it. And the fields, when you see the field that you want to do the aggregation on, just right away that you will enter the field that we want to sum up the salaries now, right? So we want to sum up the salaries. So let's put the salary in there. And the criteria, since I have already told you that the criteria table has to be entered in the function, we are gonna get the criteria table for the function and highlight this whole table with the row that has the column names, because this is very important. And close the function, and the function will return an error. And the first thing that I wanted to like highlight, because that's one of the things that can cause a mess up with the functions, is that when you give the database, when you call the database or the table, make sure to include all. And that's basically what's gonna be included if you are gonna highlight the whole table. And in the field, let's try with this first. It's still an error because in the field input, it doesn't want you to give it like the whole column, like the whole range of the column. It wants you just to tell it the name of the column. And we do that either by choosing the name of the column from the table. So now it works. Or we give it the name of the column as a text. Like salary, that's exactly the name of the column in the table here. And it still works. So either like a dynamic reference or a static reference. And I'm gonna fix everything and to apply the same syntax and see how the same syntax can be applied to all of the functions or the database functions. So the average is the average, and now it's gonna get me the average of salaries that apply these criteria, and the count. Now the database functions have both dcount and dcount a, and if you're familiar with count and count a, this is basically the same difference. So let's try to try count, for example. So what is it showing me now? It is basically showing me that there are 6 employees who can that has these criteria applied to 6 employees in total. And the function is counting from the salary column, and that's a number column, of course. So the difference between count and count A, if anyone is not familiar with it, count counts the number values, count A counts all the cells that are not blank, including if they have text in it. So we are gonna basically also counting the number of employees with dcount A. Let's do that. Because it counts any if we try to count, for example, to tell it to count from the full name here, it's gonna give me a 0 because the full name has no numbers, so it's not gonna count anything. But dcount works with salary, but actually dcount A can work with full name column. No, it doesn't. So what? Because we didn't change the decount. So decount A, yeah, 6. So what I'm trying to make here that we have decount, both decount and decount A within the database options. And again, I'm gonna copy and paste. We also have the daemon, and dmax. I'm just trying to make out the point that and also just to try it with a little bit different thing. So yeah, the products The same thing, the product again means that it gets all the salaries for these 6 employees that have the criteria applied and multiply these salaries by each other's. So in this case, it doesn't make sense. But in any way, you can use it with other use cases if it makes sense. And you have both the STDEV if you are working with a sample and the STDEVB for population if you are working for if you are getting the standard deviation for a population, and similarly you can get the variation for a sample and you can get the variation for a population. Again, it's mathematically or statistically a little bit different underneath, but anyways, these aggregations, again, the product and standard deviation and variation are unique and specific to the database functions, and they have no other alternatives in the XF's function family. You can still do that with a little bit of workaround, probably with combining XF's functions with filter function, for example. And by the way, Crespo has a great series of videos on the filter function on LinkedIn. You can follow him. I think we already do. You can follow him to follow these spectacular videos about the different uses of the filter function. So the filter function in a workaround can be used with the normal and regular aggregation functions of these aggregations in order to do the filtering, I guess. But why do the workaround if you can have like a direct function to do that for you, right? So what is left for us now is the last member of the database functions, which is the dget. So actually the dget, despite it's one of the database functions, it's more of a lookup function than an aggregating function according to filters. So basically it gets you one specific value according to the criteria, the one set of criteria or the two sets or more than two set of criteria that you are given it. And it has to be a specific one value in the database, in the original database. And if more than one value or more than one record applies to these criteria, it's gonna throw you an error because it cannot give you more than one value. Let's see how it can be done. Basically, again, the same syntax, table dgets, don't forget the all, as I always do. This time I didn't forget it, so I'm glad. And let's get the full name of the employee who has these specific criteria. And we'll see that Hermina, like, anyhow, this employee just has the exact, this is the employee, he has a salary of 1,655 and in the department sales, and his job title is executive secretary and joined the company in this specific date. If we enter the more than one set of criteria, the function is gonna look for the records who all the records that applies the first set of criteria and the second set of criteria or the second set of criteria or the third set of criteria and return just the value. It has to be just one value that applies to all of these criteria in order to not to throw an error. So the dget function is a little bit of a lookup function. It's not an aggregating function really, but it's a part of the family. And again, to go on with the same analogy, this is what the old man does in his free time, let's say. So this is basically the practical part in the webinar. I'm gonna end up with going back to the PowerPoint. I think I have to, okay, let me change what I'm sharing. So back to our presentation. Yes, we have looked at how XF functions can be used and how XF's functions can be used, and we have seen also the Gramba in action. Now, what I want to get to is that decision tree. Like, if you want to aggregate values based on criteria, how do you decide? How do you decide if you're going to use the XF's functions, or the database functions? And this is just a proposed decision tree proposed by me. So it's not basically a theory. It's not the database functions theory. It's just a proposed view for this. And in order, I'm pushing this in order to encourage you not to forget the database functions if you are dealing or doing aggregating based on criteria often. So if you are just doing some average, count, min, or max, you're gonna go with all of these alternatives or choices. But basically, if you want to do any aggregation according to any filtered aggregation, other than some average, count, min, or max, specifically standard deviation and variation, I'd say just to go directly with the D functions right away. So we have like a short path here. If you're gonna do the regular aggregations, some average, count, min, or max, that will depend. If you have one criterion, um, you'll have some choices. If you are doing some average or count, use XF functions. If you are doing min or max, you'll go to minfs or maxfs, which belong to the XF's functions, because there is no minf without the S or maxf without the S. So you just use those with one criteria. It would be basically like as if it one F, if you get what I mean. So if you have one criterion, but you have still want to do other aggregations, again, go to the D functions like standard deviation or variation. For multiple criterion, do you have one set of criteria, like a set that has to be all true in order to include in the aggregation? If you have one set of criteria, are you doing some average, count, min, or max? Use XFs. If you want to do other aggregations, use the D functions. If you have more than one set of criteria, and this is like the holy grail of the D functions, this is what D functions are basically for. So in this case, 4 case scenarios, I hope that you can see now that the D functions can be useful for. If not, I hope that that happened, because also if that happened, that maybe mean a comeback time for the database, the old grandpa. Please notice his innocent eyes, because I've worked on it a little bit, like for half a minute. I hope you like the grandpa now. And if not, I am open to questions or comments or any sort of discussion. Yes, and you actually reminded me of some stuff that I wanted to share. So, for example, in the DGET, again, the point is that the criteria has to apply for a specific one value, exactly, because if it does apply to one more than one value, it will get through an error. But what I wanted to share about the DGET and the D functions are to assert that these functions can work with the logical operators, right? So it can work with the higher than, lower than, or equal to, and stuff like that. And it also can work with the wildcards, right? So if you want to do a fuzzy matching, or if I think that's more related to your question, right? If you want to do to include, for example, in the D functions, if you want to include people who are or have like some sort of analysis in their job titles. So either they are like analysts or senior analysts or senior analysis manager or something like that. So basically you can add here a column for the job title, and it has to be exactly the same. And basically what you're gonna do is to use the asterisk and analyze and asterisk again. So basically what it does is to count. Now we are getting in the criteria people in the sales department about the 40 years old, under 50 years old, who have the analyst characters in their job titles, either analysts, senior analyst, manager, and stuff like that, who have been hired between these two dates. And this is, again, if you're not familiar with this, this is called the wildcards. You can use the asterisk to tell Excel to look for any job titles that has these characters in the middle or at the first or anything. If you put the asterisk at the end, you're telling Excel to look for the job titles who start with analyst and then have anything, whatever, at the end, and so on. If you put the asterisk at the first, so whatever at the first of the job title, as long as it has analyst at the end. So what I wanted to point out here, and I hope that partially answers your question, Crespo, and what I'm interested in here is to say that the functions work well with the wildcards. So you can basically do that with the dget as well.
Okay, okay. If you have a question, you can put it on the chat. My other question was, you said actually, which is true, instead of having the workarounds using the exifs, which I do, have you ever tested the speed? Is it faster to use the database functions instead of the exifs workaround?
I'm afraid I haven't, but
Okay.
yes, we can test this together and let you know. We can gamble on this, but I think, and I'd argue for that the D functions would be faster, since that in the other workarounds you'd have to include other functions as well. So I'd argue for the D functions, but we can check this later and we can discuss this for sure.
So how did you find yourself on top of this Excel mountain? I know it was not by accident, so would you mind sharing a short story?
You mean, how did I know the dget functions?
No, how did you become an expert data storyteller and get into data analysis and all that?
You mean my career story?
Yes.
So yeah, basically, as you mentioned in the first slide, that I come basically from an educational and professional background in journalism. I studied journalism at university, and I used to work as a reporter. So first, I was introduced to data and analytics through data journalism, which is basically like, yeah, you do data analysis, but you do that for journalism purposes, like you report to the general audiences and
Okay.
public. And for other stuff, for other reasons, I had to like shift from that to business research, and then I became like a full-time data analyst. But that, I think that approach, or that like experience has given me like a unique way of treating like data analytics and stuff like that, like focusing on the part of data storytelling and the part of visuals and part of actually making sure that you are communicating and that you are getting the message to the people, and
Okay.
how to do so in a narrative-based way. So this is how I became interested in data storytelling when I tackle or approach the whole data analysis thing.
Okay. Okay. So what advice would you give to somebody who wants to get into data storytelling and data visualization and data analysis?
Um, Again, it depends on the background. I think, as I said, like many people from different backgrounds are getting into the field of data analytics these days, and I think that's a good thing. And some of the backgrounds, some people are coming from backgrounds related to humanities in one way or another, like myself. I think these people are more like by nature or by the nature of their background are more focused on the part of the data storytelling and the actually um, delivering the messages and stuff like that. But people coming from technical backgrounds and so on, I think this is becoming a crucial skill that needs to be acquired with the advancement of the old technologies related to artificial intelligence, generative AI, stuff like that. Because we are seeing that generative AI and all these tools are becoming better and better at generating or doing the
Yeah,
analysis,
yeah,
doing the even like coding. They are getting better and better, and that so the technical skills are going to be hugely aided by the new technologies, artificial intelligence and stuff like that. But what is not going to be like majorly or significantly aided by the artificial intelligence, what cannot be, at least in the near future, as far as I'm concerned, is the communication part, the human part, the human touch part, that how to do that, how to add an attitude to a presentation, how to choose the right time, the right message, with the right way of reporting, like regarding the visuals, regarding the text. So data storytelling. And I agree with Jose that data plus story plus design it is very important. Despite that,
yeah,
maybe you can't actually report data without doing design like visuals. It depends again on the message, on the audience. That's the most important thing. But regarding data storytelling, of course, I'd be more than happy and pleased if you follow me on LinkedIn, or we can get into discussions about data storytelling or get references. I can recommend some references, but one of the best references that I like to highlight and recommend is a man called Brent Dykes. You can also follow him on LinkedIn. He has a very good book about data storytelling. Um, and he's posting regularly on about storytelling, so I recommend you follow him as well. And of course, you have the other famous book, um, Storytelling with Data. That's another famous one as well. But if you
okay.
want other recommendations or resources, you can get in touch. I'll be more than happy to do so.